Greetings wizardlings, today I'm going to teach you two geomantic candle magic techniques. The first will be very straightforward, it will be very accessible. You will only need a basic knowledge of the figures. And if you don't know anything about geomancy just yet, this is probably not the first place to start. I will link some resources down below. In particular, you might want to check out the lecture of Dr. Alexander Cummins at the Kepler College. I'll put a link down for that below. It's really great introduction. Good books to check out for geomancy is John Michael Greer's The Art and Practice of Geomancy. And then of course you want to get Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. There's a section in there on geomancy, and of course it's a must-have for this kind of work. I will be teaching you 2 techniques here. One will be very accessible. It will be anyone who with some basic understanding of the figures will be able to use this technique. And the second technique, it will be more suited to geomancers, people who are more magicians, practitioners who are using geomancy actively for divination and for magical work. And that's one of the great things about geomancy. Geomancy and its figures have a magical and as well as divinatory dimension, and these 2 areas overlap very beautifully and smoothly. And of course, you know my style is based on Solomonic folk magic and hoodoo, so I'm going to be mashing these things up in these 2 techniques. So let's get started. So the first technique is a very straightforward candle magic spell using the geomantic figures that are derived, the sigils that are derived from the geomantic figures. And one of the first things that the aspiring Solomonic folk magician will have undoubtedly spotted when you see these sigils, that's the figure for Puella, is that these figures tend to be oblong, lengthy figures, and they are really well suited for candles. They go beautifully on candles. So when I started working with geomancy in around about 2009, 2010, when I got John Michael Greer's book, that's one of the first things that struck my eyes, how great these figures are for candles. Now the sigils, they're called figures, geomantic figures, are created by connecting the dots, as it were, on the geomantic figure. So the geomantic figure is that multi-dotted pictogram that you will be familiar with if you've ever seen a geomantic chart. And this sigil is created by connecting the dots in multiple different ways. So there is a set of 16 of these magical figures that will allow you to invoke and incorporate the forces that are described by the figures themselves. So what you will need is very straightforward. To do a geomantic candle spell in simplest form is a vigil light, or a simple taper will work as well, but I'm going to show you how to do a vigil light. And you are going to need a vigil. You will need a herb of planetary correspondence. Each of the geomantic figures has got a planetary correspondence. It also has an angelic and correspondence and a spirit that is correspondent to it. Nonetheless, you will need a candle, you will need an herb, you will need a planetary oil, or you could use a condition oil that's suited to your purpose, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to select a figure based on your intention for the spell. So for instance, if I am intending to attract the love of beautiful young woman, then Puella, which literally means girl, as a figure of Venus, is a very good choice, and that's the figure that I inscribed on this pink vigil light, right? And you will do so in the hour of Venus. Now there are 2 approaches to for the astrological timing or for the magical timing using geomantic figures. And the first approach is just to use a regular planetary timing. Get that app for your phone from Sirius Labs. I think there are a bunch of these apps now. And just check the planetary hour and do this work in the planetary hour when the moon is waxing, if it's a constructive work, and when the moon is waning, if it's a destructive work. So that's the first approach. The second approach is to use geomantic hours. And it's a similar system to planetary hours. And the best source for that is to check out John Michael Greer's book. But it's the same principle. There will be an hour that is governed by a certain figure, and then it would be good to do this work in the hour governed by the figure. Personally, I've never used geomantic hours for the simple reason that I'm lazy and I like using planetary hours, and it's worked fine. So your mileage may vary, but nonetheless you want to do this during the hour of Venus if you're doing a Venus work, which in this case is what is going on. We've got the figure Puella here for a girl, and we're going to dress it with some rose. We're going to add some Venus oil or some rose oil, other herbs of planetary correspondence. And we will write our petition that the beautiful young woman should come to us, etc., etc. We will place our petition under the candle and we will light it. Bam! Simple geomantic candle spell that incorporates astrological timing, talismanic work, because we're creating the figure in the hour governed by that planet. So it takes on a talismanic quality, and then we will take care of that candle as you would do any other candle spell. You would add stuff to it daily, you would pray over it daily, preferably in the hour governed by that planet, and hopefully your petition will be granted speedily. So that's the first technique, simple as can be. The only thing that I would say is, once again, my preferences and what I recommend to all my students and anyone that I teach magic is to use liquid chalk markers on the candles when you are drawing sigils, holy names, or geomantic figures, because invariably when this candle is finished, you are going to throw away the glass, and you don't want to throw away your geomantic talisman. Also, you don't want to disrespect that figure that you put so much love and energy into creating, so you want to wash that off before you throw away the glass. And now we can move on to the slightly more advanced approach that will be more suited to someone who has an understanding of geomancy and the interaction of the figures, right? And in this case, we will be using 3 geomantic figures, and we will be in effect using the court that is produced by a geomantic chart. You will know that a geomantic chart creates a court of 3 figures that govern that chart: a right witness, a left witness, and a judge. And the chart as a whole is read through the lens of that court, right? So, and the interaction of those 3 figures in the court govern the whole chart, but they also have a certain mathematical ratio towards each other. Any 2 of the figures will always produce the third. So the right witness and the left witness will always produce the judge. And that's one of the fascinating things about geomantic magic and working in this way, is that you can take these figures and kind of interconnect them to create a confluence of magical influences or spiritual power, right? So this requires some skill, of course. You need to know which figures are favorable to combine and which are not favorable to combine, and some basic knowledge of geomancy will go a long way. But there are, of course, lists of canned meanings for these geomantic courts, right? For example, the traditional combination of Letitia, Puella, and Fortuna Major are very auspicious usually, because you're having all these benefic planets, which is Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun coming together. And so that's a very auspicious combination. And in this case, it would be Fortuna Major is represented by the yellow candle, Letitia is represented by the purple candle, and Puella here is represented by the green candle, right? And then Puella would be our judge, as we used Puella here to be the focal point of the work. In this case, Puella would be the outcome of this work. We want to then bring to us a lover, which is Puella, and we will have the good fortune of including the benefic influences of the Sun and Jupiter, Fortuna Major and Letitia, right? Now, in effect, we are backward engineering a geomantic reading and a geomantic outcome. I find this idea very exciting, yeah? In addition to that, there is the possibility of taking a very good reading. If you have done a reading on a matter and you get a very favorable reading and the court is very favorable, you can then proceed to perform a spell using that combination of geomantic figures. to fix that, to make it certain that it will happen. And there is a parallel for this in Chinese magic. If you read any of Stephen Karcher's book, a very famous scholar and commentator on the I Ching, he speaks about a practice in ancient China where if a favorable set of figures are cast using the I Ching, that diviners would perform a ritual called fixing the omen. They would essentially take those two hexagrams, and they would perform a magical ritual that would set it so that it was ensured that the auspiciousness of that omen would come to pass, right? So there is that's an exciting idea for me, and I think there's fun terrain to experiment in. If you've done a very auspicious geomantic chart, it might be a good idea then to perform a spell using the court of that chart, and that's what I've done here, right? So we have got a figure with a candle with a figure for Fortuna Major inscribed on it, and ideally you would inscribe that in the hour of the Sun. The candle for Letitia, you would do that in the hour of Jupiter, and the candle for Puella with the figure of Puella engraved on it, and you would do that in the hour of Venus, right? And then there is something else very interesting going on here. You will notice that there is this triangular formation, which of course is the triangular pattern that the Geomantic Court takes when you do a reading. But of course, in traditional African American hoodoo, burning candles in Trinity using a triangular arrangement like this is very, very traditional. It's a very common practice because it refers to the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, of course, right? So it's a very common practice to burn candles in Trinity, and then to have something in the center of that triangle that you are enchanting or using as a focus of your sympathetic magical manipulations. So here, for example, I've got a little doll baby, and since we are doing work to attract this beautiful young woman into our life, I would have stuffed her with herbs of Venus. I would have done my petition, put it in there, and maybe dressed it with oils and done all the kinds of things that one would do with a doll baby traditionally, right? I place it in the center here, and having drawn the sigils in the various hours, I would ideally then do this right, since the judge of this, or the figure of the candle that determines the outcome, as it were, which is Puella in this case, we would do this then in the hour of Venus. We'd light some incense, some Venusian incense, and then we would light these candles with invocations either to their angelic and spiritual rulers, or in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, with psalms. There are other possibilities, of course. You could do a bottle spell, placing within it the various ingredients that you would normally do in a bottle spell, and choose a geomantic court that, or a combination of geomantic figures that is conducive for the outcome that you want. You could do a mojo bag there in the middle. You could empower an oil or a spiritual bath, anything really where you want to have the focal point of the spell be influenced by the three geomantic figures and their astrological influences. Some knowledge of the interaction of the geomantic figures, their symbolic meanings, and the way that those play out in real life is necessary to work with it in this triadic form, because there is some nuance involved. And as I mentioned earlier, there are lists of canned meanings that you can refer to, and I think that in John Hayden's Theo Major there is a list of courts and their meanings, and there are other couple of traditional sources and authors and commentators that you will find that will have written commentaries on all the possible combination of courts. So of course in this case we have the figure for Fortuna Major engraved On the yellow candle, we will address that with solar oil. On the purple candle, we will have engraved the figure of Laetitia, address that with some Jupiter oil. And on the green candle, we would have engraved the figure of Puella and engraved that with some Venus oil. We would then light these 3 candles with invocations appropriate to the spiritual hierarchies or the holy names, and whatever divine influences you want to invoke that are astrologically suited here, or simply to follow a traditional hoodoo formula, just to light them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I'm sure a Renaissance geomancer would have been perfectly comfortable with that also. And then to pray over that with psalms, to manipulate the magical focal point here. In this case, it would be the doll baby. So we would talk to the doll baby. We would dress it with oils. We would manipulate it in various oil ways. Sprinkle rose on it. All the things that one might do in a love spell, then we would do under the auspice of these geomantic forces. So there you have it, 2 straightforward techniques for doing some geomantic candle magic. I hope you found this useful. Remember to like or subscribe, and thank you for watching.